What's going on, guys? Welcome back into Content Meta. Now, first things first, even though this review covers the 8th episode of the CW series, this actually marks this channel's debut review of the show. So the game plan moving forward is as follows. Since there's only 2 episodes left for this season, we'll be dropping reviews in subsequent order on what we'll deem as Swamp Thing Saturdays, even though this review should drop Tuesday. And then, from here on out, the reviews for episodes 1 through 7 will also drop as scheduled on Saturdays as well. And should they keep premiering the second season's new episodes on Wednesdays, regardless, our reviews/discussions will always drop on Saturdays. And just to give you a heads up, each review will be a full spoiler-filled review. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Picking up from where we last left off, after a near-fatal meeting with Sheriff Lucilia and Matt, Avery finds himself severely wounded, stranded, and alone. Not to mention, he eventually begins to encounter things that may or may not be real. One thing's for certain though, the darkness or the rot that's been in the swamp all these years is not going to make it easy for Avery. Some of the plant life on the trees have seemed to come alive, and even after Avery marks a tree to keep track of his location, the darkness erases it just to make sure it keeps him within the swamp for some dark revelations. We then cut to Abby and Harlan, who have arrived at the CDC in Atlanta to have some tests ran on some biological samples from Ray. Now, up to this point in the show, we've been treated to some fairly recognizable actors that have contributed to the show's lore, but none more iconic to the Swamp Thing marquee as the new assistant director, Dr. Polymer, played by Adrienne Barbeau, who was the original love interest for the 1982 big screen's debut of the Swamp Thing. Abby does inform Dr. Polymer of a dangerous new pathogen that's been on the loose in Moray, but Dr. Polymer claims to already have been informed due to an email from Harlan. Dr. Polymer then goes on to share some of Abby's lack of evidence, deeming her patchwork of field study to be a case that is to be continued. But judging by the henchman-looking guy upstairs, I'd put my money on the CDC being a catalyst for the growth accelerant, which also triggered the darkness. Among all of the voices that Avery has been hearing in the swamp, none of them are more startling as the apparition of Lucilia appearing right before him. Shotgun in hand, she taunts Avery and hones in on his vulnerable state and how much the swamp hates him, similar to her own feelings, which has to be fresh in his mind due to the confrontation that nearly cost him his life. And it is here where the show shines in its atmospheric composition, which is a bit on the lower budget side, sure, but the way in which it places its characters in certain positions, like Avery for example, who's always been in a position of power, but is now exposed. It's these type of elements that compel you to see its resolution through, and this is what the show has done exceptionally well. Now, after the darkness gives Avery a couple of good scares to keep his blood pumping, we cut back to Abby and Harlan at the CDC, who are trying to come to terms with Abby's total radio silence. Yet despite all of that, what she does tell him seems far-fetched. We then shift to Dr. Woodrue and Nathan Ellery as they reveal plans helped further along by Avery's wife, Maria Sunderland, to fund Dr. Woodrue's work, which needs a direct sample from Alec or the Swamp Thing. And if you don't know by now that the CDC has always had a hand in the introduction of the mutagen into the swamp, you need a new prescription for that writing on the wall. Now, Avery's next vision and subsequent encounter both serves as the focal point for the episode's title, as well as also shedding some light on the one person who has influenced Avery to become the man he has become, his father. He immediately recognizes his younger self, and the scene before him seems to bring back some memories, even causing him to repeat some of the words. His father says a line that seems to be taken right out of Avery's book of quotes, and unreal as it seems, it becomes clear that this was an actual event, despite that what happens next appears to be like all other visions. While his father was trying to chop down one of the trees, either out of spite to nature or to satisfy his own ego, a limb comes alive and pulls Avery's father into the fire, leaving him to scream uncontrollably. Now, this obviously traumatic event is a much needed peek into the psyche of Avery Sunderland, but is abruptly cut short with the Swamp Thing towering above him. In the next scene, we have Abby and Harlan talk about some things quaint from her childhood and some things not so quaint, like the fact that her mother died when she was 8. She eventually spills the beans on Alec's condition though, but right after Harlan leaves Abby's apartment, he's confronted by the henchman guy at the CDC and is abducted. We eventually cut back to Avery, who wakes up to a horrific discovery, but is quickly relieved and shocked to find that after a little discourse, the creature that's in his presence is Alec. The show then expands its lore straight from the horse's mouth, as Alec, or the Swamp Thing, explains that his transformation is a result of the green balancing out the darkness, and that the darkness is rising due to men taking from the swamp. We briefly check back in with Matt, who is understandably uneasy about the recent turn of events, but is assured by his mother Lucilia to keep it together. As we catch back up with Avery and Alec, being the cunning old dog that Avery has been taught to be, he promises to work with Dr. Woodrue on a cure for Alec, who unbeknownst to him, lets him leave. Now as we catch back up to Abby, she returns to the CDC and is told by Dr. Poliber that Harlan has been reassigned. It isn't until she meets with Nathan Ellery in the conference room, both she and us, the audience, learn the scope of the CDC's plan to bring in Alec. Couple that with the fact that when Avery shows up unannounced at Dr. Woodrue's house to treat his wounds, Dr. Woodrue reveals that Nathan Ellery has been a secret investor this entire time. Well, you put those facts together, then you should know that by now, the Swamp Thing is about to get his first real confrontation and test his new powers. Unfortunately, yes, they do overpower him and capture him using the same method that he himself used to halt the growth accelerant in the pilot episode. So, this just about does it for the review for this episode. This was a very pivotal entry when it comes to the lore of the franchise and stands as a turning point for the last 2 episodes of the season. Make sure you stay tuned in the Content Meta, hit that subscribe button, and please leave a like for this video. It really helps out the channel. And until then, see you then.